Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day, and I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's been a ton of stuff that has happened over the last 48 hours all across the globe, and especially inside of the country of Ukraine, where they have been embattled in a war since February the 24th of last year and continue to fight very heavily along in the Donbass. And we continue to go through and we continue to cover these news stories, despite how awful a lot of them are, because we have a purpose here. The purpose of this channel is to inform you as the audience as to what is happening in the world around you and give you some context as to where it is. I've noticed that over time, a lot of people, it's very commonly stated that when the war in Vietnam began, no one knew where Vietnam was on a map. And likewise, when the war in Iraq occurred, most people didn't know where Iraq or Afghanistan were. Likewise, we're trying to put some of that into perspective for you here on this channel, obviously using the map itself and to kind of give you an idea of where it's happening in those countries, keep you oriented. But the main purpose of this channel is not only to inform you, but also to try and give back. The whole purpose of this, the whole purpose of TNN, the reason why we're never doing super chats, the reason why we're never doing any kind of merchandising, and the same reason that we are never monetizing this for personal gain is because we are going to be doing nothing but fundraisers. We're doing nothing but trying to help people, and if possible, help people directly affected by these news stories that we are talking about every single night, whether that be the war in Ukraine, or if you're talking about famines and stuff, you know, anti-terrorism measures there in the Middle East and in Africa and South America. We want to cover as many places as possible. We're able to do a lot of that. You guys as the audience are what allows us to be the news that gives back, and the way that you're able to do that is by checking out the video description below. You're going to see a ton of different organizational links, and they cover the whole span of the globe, and we're constantly looking to more. So please, if you have some, send them to us. We constantly want to get more. We want to add more to this list. We've had to make sure that they are, in fact, reputable organizations or individuals, but secondly, that 70% or more of the donations that they receive go directly to their programs, meaning 70% or more actually goes to helping people, with 30% or less, with the emphasis on or less, going to covering things like salaries and administration's costs, the stuff that makes a lot of organizations, especially larger ones, a little bit more controversial, which is why you may see things like the Red Cross, which aren't down there, even though we do know that they are out there for obvious reasons. But those thresholds just quite don't line up, and that's something we've gone through a lot of their tax structures with and many other things. So please be sure to check them all out. I implore you to check out all of them, whether you're focused on Ukraine or not, because there are unfortunately a lot of news stories, a lot of things pretty terrible that are happening, crises throughout the globe that are caused as either by a repercussion of the war in Ukraine or that are happening separately that just don't get as heavily reported on. And they deserve some love and affection and some support as well, as equal to as anybody else who's going through such a pretty terrible time. So if you can't give a lot to those organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Then one of the biggest things you can help us do is help us grow this project, help us grow this channel. The more people that come here, the more people that are joining in. Of course, the more people that become informed, but also the more people that are able to donate, that are able to provide and help out with that endeavor and continue to allow us to be the news that gives back. Now, before we get into the news itself, a couple things to be said. So over the last few streams, we've obviously had some individuals who may not always agree with the content or what we are saying here on the channel. That's perfectly okay. I entirely hope that you guys would actually challenge some of the things that are being said, because that is just the right thing to do. You should always have some kind of doubt as to what's happening, and we do try to weed through that as best we can, but it's very clearly stated for us that we have a bias regarding Ukraine, that we are, in fact, backing the Ukrainian side of this, based off of the evidence provided and personal experiences, especially on my part. I simply cannot back the Russian Federation in any way, shape, or form regarding the war. Other than that, we try to be apolitical and we try to stay unbiased in our news stories, but of course, that's as close as we can, because there is always going to be some kind of bias in there. So, but we want to be able to be forward about that. But if you're challenging what we're saying, that's fine. And if you're having conversations in the chat, that's amazing. I would love for that to continue happening. A lot of great things have been said and brought up here. But please keep it professional and please keep it polite. I do not have any tolerance when it comes to things such as slurs and remarks, whether that be against the Russians themselves. I've heard the term orcs and many, many other things, worms and many other things. I do not allow that in the chat. Likewise, please do not be calling anyone a Nazi or what have you in the chat. I do not agree with that. That will not be allowed. You will be removed. And I do have moderators moderating the chat to make sure. But we've had some issues over the last few days. Please keep it to a minimum, if not at all, because we want to keep this professional, and we want to have constructive talks here. And if you have questions in comments and you're joining us live tonight, please feel free to ask them, because I am here and I'm watching the live chat and I'm very much willing to answer your questions to the best of my ability. Now, if you may be new here, I'll be more than happy to give you a little bit of background on myself. So a lot of this stuff has to deal with the war in Ukraine, of course, and also anti-terrorism operations going on throughout the globe and general conflicts happening throughout the globe and military stuff in general. For myself, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I served as an O-352 anti-tank missileman and a corporal with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. I went to the Middle East twice. My first tour between October of 2017 and March of 2018, I went to the country of Syria, where I spent 4.5 months as part of Operation Inherent Resolve, and I was in support of Special Operations Forces inside of the country of Syria, as well as coalition partners and the Syrian Democratic Forces, or also known as the YPJ, and there are other associated groups, where I literally lived, ate, worked, slept with them in that country during my time there. And primarily fighting the Islamic State, but also conducting stabilization efforts and providing security to critical infrastructure in the northeastern part of Syria, especially against the Russians, primarily the Wagner Group, and also the pro-Assad regime. My second tour to the Middle East, I went back and I was the Javelin team leader for the Crisis Response Company out of Kuwait. This is between October of 2019 and March of 2020. From there, after I spent the majority of my time in Kuwait, I went to the Baghdad Embassy complex on New Year's of 2020 when it was almost overrun by 4,000 protesters there in Baghdad. There I oversaw the entire anti-armor operations over the entirety of the Baghdad Embassy complex as the subject matter expert there, and I also was standing post and providing security and also doing counter riot efforts there. From there, I went to Saudi Arabia, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines who were preparing for a deployment to Yemen as part of the Saudi coalition there to fight the Houthi rebels. I am a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armor doctrine. I'm also a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a fully cross-trained rifleman, a partially cross-trained radio operator, and a CLS or Combat Lifesaver Certified Marine. And I do have battlefield experience in treating casualties. On top of that, I am interested in trying to remain well-rounded by keeping knowledge in things like history, which interests me, science, technology, human geography, geopolitics, that kind of stuff. So outside of my spectrum of expertise, I will never claim to be an expert, but I will try to still answer questions to the best of my ability. In the military, outside of my specific expertise, I am qualified in small unit leadership tactics as a team leader, but outside of things like that, I just can't talk at the larger scales very well. I can hypothesize, but I was never formally trained for strategic level things, very small unit leadership tactical endeavors. So please keep that in mind. Regardless if I'm a subject matter expert or not, I please implore you as the viewer, there is no substitute, no matter who it is, no matter what kind of an expert they may be and what their experience is, to please do your own research. There's no substitute for any of that. And if you have any questions or you want a starting point, or if you just want to follow along, these maps are available on our website. I post them every single day before the stream, and you can go on and you can go through these points. And a lot of times we have associated articles from other news organizations out there, or with associated documents that we just don't show here on the stream, that you can go and you can conduct some of your own research from. So please be sure to check those out if you're interested and want to have anything else. Otherwise, let's begin. And we actually start with our major news story. We've been following it since we started the channel. It's taken up the channel since we started it, and that is the war in Ukraine. There is a lot of stuff happening inside of Ukraine, especially out of Kyiv. We've had several different developments. If you may remember, there was a large, massive strike that occurred across the country of Ukraine on the 14th, and we have some updates from that event. We can see here that Kyiv was actually hit with anti-aircraft missiles. So The S-400 missiles, the 48N-6DM anti-aircraft missiles specifically, which wouldn't be easily tracked by Ukrainian air defense forces, were were fired at the capital of Kyiv. We do understand that they were targeting major energy infrastructure in the capital, and this was reported by Euromaidan Press. And they do have some evidence of this. Everything, you would not believe it, but you can find serial numbers on many, many things, even after they have detonated, which is how you can identify what kind of explosive it may have been. The S-400, similar to the S-300, it's actually a newer system. Late development in the Soviet Union and early Russian Federation. It is one of the fewer systems that they have, but they are capable of being... Due to limited stockpiles, we do know that a number of S-300s and now would appear S-400s have been converted from hitting air targets, seeing as they were designed as a surface-to-air missile system, to striking ground targets. They're horrendously inaccurate with an accuracy anywhere between 3 and 500 meters, but they are able to hit large-scale structures such as energy infrastructure, which is what we see them being used as now. But it isn't just limited to that. We've also seen them used against cities such as Kherson and Mykolaiv as well. We've also seen it used against Kharkiv and a large variety of other cities across the country as ad hoc cruise and ballistic missiles. While this was going on, a child actually celebrated their birthday in the metro. This is a photo that came out from Volodymyr here. They're in Kyiv, coming from the New Voice of Ukraine. Something incredibly sad and depressing about such an affair taking place in the metro, being used as a bomb shelter. But there's also some beauty in it, and the fact that it is the resiliency of the Ukrainian people, which is always dumbfounding to me, considering the absolute horrendous situations that they have all been put in, and for such a long duration of time. It's incredible to me how these people continue to have such a high morale and are able to just carry on as if life was semi-normal. It blows my mind, and it just blows the mind of so many people. It's such an impressive thing to see. You cannot be not impacted by that. It is something that you have to be moved in a way by what you see there. However, that doesn't mean that the news isn't good, or that doesn't mean that the news is always good when it comes to what we're seeing here. So coming from the United Nations, we can see that they have released yet another civilian casualty update. And they have stated that, quote, latest update on civilian casualties in context of Russia's armed attack against Ukraine. 7,031 have been killed, which include 433 children. 11,327 people have been injured, including 827 children, mostly caused by shelling and airstrikes. The actual toll is much higher. So, and we do get this from their official website. This is the United Nations Office for Human Rights inside of Ukraine, and we do see that statement coming from them here. So this is through the 15th of January. These are the casualties which have been confirmed by the United Nations. And we have stated before and continue to state, and Denise Brown continues to state her frustration with, is that the Russian forces will not allow for the United Nations behind the lines. So they have yet to be allowed throughout the entirety of this war. They have yet to be allowed into occupied territories. And if you want more, the actual document, the actual file for this, or for the actual report, I should rather say, is actually listed here as well. It's in a PDF. This is coming from the official United Nations website regarding their mission to Ukraine. We also get a child casualty update from the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights. And these numbers are partially high, are always going to usually be higher than the confirmations provided by the United Nations, but they do keep in line. We do see them keeping very close in line with what the United Nations has confirmed later on. And what we're seeing right now is, quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 455 Ukrainian children have died, 897 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region. Moreover, 336 Ukrainian children were reported missing, and 13,899 were deported. End quote. And that is coming from the press service of the Ukrainian Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights. And so the forceful deportment of children specifically is sanctioned under the 1949 Geneva Conventions, and it's sanctioned, and it's also enshrined and further outlined in the 1993 Rome Statute. Here it is being stated in both of these that the forced deportation of children from a group to another group, aka from Ukrainians to Russians, is actually a method of genocide against a people. So if you go to the United Nations, you can actually find these statements and the outlines regarding what constitutes genocides, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing. I have pulled them up numerous times here, and you can see that it is in fact a consequence of genocide. That is something that is genocidal in nature, is to deport children from a group to another group. Once again, 1949 Geneva Conventions and also the 1993 Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court. We see some stuff coming out that's definitely a little bit more lighthearted, and that comes from here. This is Slovakia, which they're the 8th SUZANA S2 SPG, or self-propelled gun, has arrived in Ukraine. So this is yet another self-propelled artillery system, 155 millimeter, which will now be going to the front lines, probably going to be seeing immediate action, as crews have already been trained how to use these. And that's because of the high intensity that we're seeing picking up across the entirety of the front line, whether you're talking Luhansk, Donetsk, where have you. We're seeing an increase in kinetic activity there on the front, and so these will be very much widely needed. And that is the SUZANA 2. SUZANA 2 is a self-propelled gun platform. Unlike most that you see from NATO countries, it is on wheels. It is a very unique design, specific to some nations, such as France with the Caesar, and also here Slovakia. So we are seeing the 8th system having been delivered. But something interesting has been noticed by the open source intelligence community, and it's something that I have been picking up as well, and that is the increasing amount of NATO standardization. And something really cool has happened that actually was caught here. I was technical here on Twitter and actually caught that, and I started digging into it a little bit and do corroborate that story, is the fact that there's been a newly formed brigade inside of the Ukrainian army. It's called the 47th Assault Brigade. And what I'm starting to pick up is these individuals doesn't seem like they have actually seen combat, except for some of their non-commissioned officers and their officers. Outside of that, it seems to be relatively fresh troops, meaning likely those troops that were coming back from the United Kingdom after completing their 5-week training course. So pretty large brigade we're seeing here. It appears to be mostly a mechanized motorized infantry brigade, but it appears that they're pretty much almost completely comprised of NATO equipment. It's something that we're seeing a standardization forming of Ukraine. This is really the culmination of Ukraine shifting from being a Soviet-based, former Soviet equipment, Soviet doctrine tactics, to NATO. And that's something that we've seen them pushing for, and it's something that we've seen the development throughout this war. And this really comes to a head here, as this unit is almost completely comprised of NATO-style equipment, NATO-style training, and cleared, everything from the vehicles to the equipment that they're wearing to their weapons and their optics, NATO. And their training as well. So we can see here they're being provided. So these are M16A4s that they're using. The M16A4, as well as the M203 underbarrel grenade launcher, which we see being used here, is the actual standard issue of the United States Marine Corps. But it's also the standard issued rifle for most of the branches of the service, though that was transferred to the M4 carbine. And you can see a lot of them are using the M4 RCO. The RCO is a 4-power optic. It's something that comes standard issue, at least for my cases, was standard issue in the Marine Corps for me. It's a 4-power optic. It provides pretty well support. That would be this one up here, as best I can tell. This one over here. Something else that we're seeing, these right here. So you're seeing some of these, and you can see the RMRs on top of them. That's a that is a zero power. It doesn't have any additional power to it. That's called an RMR. It's a small reflex sight mounted on top. These are SDOs. The SDO is a 3.5 power advanced combat optic gun sight, or ACOG, that is made by the same company. They're both produced by the company Trigicon. If you go and try to buy one yourself, you will have a small heart attack, as it will probably cost much more than the rifle that you're putting it on. For me, it's about double. So pretty interesting to see. This definitely sees some NATO standardization. These are all 5.56 by 4.5 NATO standard rifle round for NATO systems. But it gets better, because this exact same brigade is also training on the M2A2 Bradleys, which we can see them doing here. Temeps asks, is NATO shifting to 6.8 millimeter as well? Yes and no. So they're not really shifting. We're not really shifting as a NATO. It's more or less the United States Army specifically. So the United States Marine Corps adopted a 5.56 by 4.5 rifle design that was actually tested by my battalion, which is the M27 IAR, or Infantry Automatic Rifle. It's produced by Heckler and Koch. And it is a very amazing rifle. It's very accurate. It has a free-floating barrel in it. It's very accurate, and they actually have converted some of them into the M38 designated marksmanship rifle. Exactly the same design, except it has a Leopold scope on top of it instead of the standard RCO, as well as it also is using a suppressor. So that is the United States Marine Corps. The U.S. Army has adopted a new rifle that is chambered in, I believe it's 6.5. It's 6.5 millimeter, not 6.8. They have several different systems that they are adopting. It's a new rifle platform. It's specifically designed. The reason for this is because when facing near peer threats, the 5.56 can sometimes come up lacking, and so the M855 round simply will not punch through standard level 4 plate body armor, which is the standard across pretty much every country you're looking at that is providing as standard issue body armor plates, steel or ceramic, regardless. Level 4 plates. And so so we're seeing that those are the issue with the M855. Now the Marine Corps, coming across this, developed the M855A1 round, but that only really improved the quality of penetration so much. It just didn't have the oomph that they were expecting it to. It was better than the standard ball M855 round, but the M855-1, which was specifically designed as a 5.56 round to punch through body armor, simply came up lacking in many ways. Better, but still lacking. And so the Army decided to go, the Army most of the time leading, considering they run the whole ordnance show. They are the ones that went out for a leading design for specifically chambered in 6.5, which is a middle cartridge between that 7.62 by 5.1, the standard NATO large caliber machine gun round, sniper rifle round as well, and also the in between 5.56 and 7.62. And you also see this in some other ways too. Sniper rifles going to 300 Win Mag with the Mark 13s in the Marine Corps. You see them doing that, so that way it's not as heavy as the 50 BMG for the M107, but you also get longer range and more stopping power than the M40A6 or the M24, also shooting that higher velocity 7.62 by 5.1 NATO out of basically a Remington 700 with an exoskeleton body. So that's kind of what you're looking at, but that's not a NATO thing. That's more of the U.S. Army leading that, and that will probably, depending on how those turn out and how those come out combat proven, considering there's still operations ongoing in parts of the world right now for counterterrorism, we'll see if that actually ends up, if the designs need improved, if they go up to a 7.62, or if they end up chambering back down to 5.56 to accommodate, or what have you. The M14, honestly, same kind of ideology as what the Army is doing right now. They had the M1 Grand 30-06 standard issue. They wanted something better. They wanted 7.62 because it was lighter. They went with the M14. Kept the Grand design. Had a lot of great upgrades. Great rifle. Was really reliable. Had a full automatic system. 20-round box magazines. And is still used in some cases today as the Mark 14 EBR or enhanced battle rifle. But it didn't see a very long service life before the M16 and the M16A1 originally came into service during Vietnam. So it could be one of those things where it's a transition. So I hope that answers your question, though. Seth Fromelt says hemp is claimed to be stronger than Kevlar. I don't know enough about it to tell you, but I know it can do some pretty crazy things. I think there are many, technically speaking, so is spider web. But you can't get a spider to actually, make a web thick enough that it'll actually do anything. But a spider's web is actually some of the most strong material in the world. And I've heard there's technically a thing out there that is saying that supposedly a spider web, that if the web itself, if the strings in the web were as thick as a pencil lead, it would stop a Boeing 747 at maximum speed. Which I have no idea if that's actually the case, but it'd be kind of cool. I'd be willing to test that. We come over here and into the Luhansk Oblast as we start getting into the meat and potatoes of the war. And we come over here into the Carmina area, where we're still seeing that slow push towards Carmina continue. We're seeing quite an extensive amount of fighting in here, but it's not a whole lot that we can directly pinpoint to the Carmina area, as there's a lot of times it's just quoted as saying the Luhansk area. But we're looking at some battlefield and terrain characteristics to kind of identify some of this stuff, especially when it comes to the weather conditions in certain parts of the country. And what we've nailed this down to is a lot of the fighting around Carmina. According to Sir Yeheda himself, who is the head of the Luhansk Regional Military Administration, on the 13th, he reported that Russian collaborators were leaving Svatove and Carmina for cities that were deeper inside of occupied Luhansk. Now, this isn't unusual. We have heard this before, but this usually was a signal that things were about to get bad for the Russians. We saw this in the Kharkiv Oblast shortly before the massive sweeping push that even overran some of the people trying to escape that were Russian collaborators. It was simply too fast. We saw that in the Kharkiv Oblast. We saw that in the Kherson Oblast as well, though that also allowed for a lot more collaborators to actually escape until those bridges and eventually the barge was actually completely destroyed. So this is usually happening because the local population that are collaborating with the Russians are seeing that things are not good, that the things are their confidence in the Russian forces, the Russian troops' capability to actually defend the territory is greatly diminishing to the point that they don't think they can do it anymore. And they don't know how long it's going to be until things finally snap. So when you're seeing those kinds of images coming out and you're hearing those kind of things coming out, it's usually a sign that Russian forces are in a very, very tight predicament and that likely they won't last very long, as we saw in Kharkiv and again in Kherson. And you're also seeing really what this war is about, and it's the war of economies. Economies and logistics win wars, and at the end of the day, sure, it's everyone that takes and holds the ground, but you can't build more tanks if you don't have money and materials, and that's what we're kind of finding out here. It's the war of economies. So this is a T90M. It's the most upgraded modern variant of the T90 available. It's worth roughly $5 million USD. This has been reportedly destroyed by an 84 millimeter rocket, also known as the AT-4, produced by Sweden. That cost $1,400 USD. So there it is. That's the T-90M. You can see it's burning. It has at least, it's been punctured. It's been penetrated. You see the internal cabin there burning. Once again, this is the most modern, upgraded variant of the T-90. Reportedly destroyed by a $1,400 rocket.
Да, пока на гору поднимешься, уже устаешь. А еще на позиции сидеть. Не, да, мимо.
And these are reportedly being filmed out of Bilharifka. Bilharifka is also located in the Luhansk Oblast. And to give you an idea as to where that's at, this is Bilharivka here. So just across the river from pretty much the Carmina battlefield. Or right now, what we're seeing is a significant amount of the fighting is taking place in and around these wood lines and around these fields. So it looks like these guys are in Bilharivka, and they're actually moving towards what would be considered the contested areas in the front lines here in this general area. And this is further confirmed. So this is actually of the Ukrainian. This is the photo of Ukrainian troops that were moving in. We showed this video when that went through. When this actually occurred, this is Ukrainian troops moving into Bilharivka. We can see Ukrainian troops coming off the line here, being shifted to another sector. Also, same building, same road out of Bilharivka. And Tim Hemp has actually pointed out, looks like the mud is nice and frozen with a smiley face. That is correct. And this is something else that was pointed out too, is the fact that in this area, we're at the point in winter now. There is still very muddy parts of Ukraine. Don't get me wrong, especially when you consider the amount of shell fire, tank tracks, constant fighting that just churns up the mud no matter what time of year it is. But that's mostly in that 23-mile sector of the front around Saldar, Bukmu, Optine, those areas. In most cases now, across a large portion of Ukraine, it has gotten cold enough. You're in really the dead center of winter. And so this has also been a very unseasonably warm winter for Ukraine, while it's been extremely cold for Russia, even by their standards, which is saying a lot. But when you're looking at Ukraine, there's a very small window here of only really a couple of weeks, because we're getting ready to immediately thaw out again. But the permafrost is set in. It's cold enough now. The ground has hardened again to allow for maneuver of armored vehicles to an extent, as long as it's in a battlefield condition like we're seeing in the Luhansk Oblast, and not what you're seeing down here in Bukmu, which is just an absolute slog through the mud and the blood here in this area. And we'll get to that here shortly. But in other parts of Ukraine, you're definitely seeing a short, probably just nothing more than a couple weeks window of being able to actually maneuver armored forces on the front lines again, and allow for some of that maneuver warfare so you don't get bogged down in that trench warfare quite like we are seeing in other parts of the front right now. So yes, The mud is nice and frozen. It's something that everyone has taken note of, and we're starting to see a little bit more armor movement as a result. But I don't think we're going to see a major offensive. We might see the final push to Carmina happen, but outside of that, from what I'm gathering here, from what's happening in the battle space, it's not as much of let's blitzkrieg an offensive here, as many people will describe it. It seems to be more let's set conditions, so that way when the springtime comes, then we can do the actual major offensive. So it seems like they're posturing themselves, probably trying to push towards Carmina, trying to push towards Svatove, because that's going to allow for the fall of the Luhansk Oblast, especially when you're looking at probably getting back into a major battle for Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Rubizny, where they know that that's going to be a very costly, very difficult engagement. So you're trying to set themselves up to position themselves to be ready to fight that. And then when the springtime comes, they're in the position that they need to be. And then they also have the equipment that they need, which is really where that 47th Brigade is really looking out. And we're seeing a lot of that equipment being pushed in here now, those promises, because by the time the springtime comes, that stuff's going to be in the country. Some of it's already going to be in use. Some of it's going to be dished out, and it's going to be set and ready for when the ground hardens again after that spring Rasputitsa mud to actually maneuver and engage and actually get into these wide-scale battles. And so that brings us down here and into the Donetsk region. We're going to start off with a daily Donetsk update. This is the latest one coming from Pavlo Kolenko, the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. And he stated, quote, on January 15th, number of victims of Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 7 injured. This comes from his official Twitter, which he has here. And he comes out with this every single morning at 8 a.m. local time, and it's covering the previous 24 hours. It would appear that 2 people were injured in Avdiivka, 2 in Bukmu, 1 in Velika Novosilka, 1 in Liman, and 1 in Saldar. And so far, since the beginning of the invasion on February the 24th, 1,307 Ukrainian civilians have been killed, with an additional 2,856 having been injured. Keep in mind, this does not include areas such as Volnovakha or the Sea of Donetsk, or especially Mariupol, because these areas are in occupied territory. Therefore, they can't be tallied up by the Ukrainian government. In Mariupol alone, you're looking at tens of thousands of deaths, as easily have been identified via the satellite Maxar footage that we've seen of multiple mass grave sites in and around the city. But the Battle of Saldar, which was recently taken by Russian forces, continues. The Battle of Saldar is not over, despite the fact that Russian forces apparently hold the city proper. This is something we had covered in our last stream here on Saturday, and that got a little bit of pushback, but I think the evidence definitely shows that the Russians have vast control of the proper city of Saldar, with Ukrainian forces being stuck on the western edge and outskirts of town, and also holding the railway and the T-0513 highway to the west, where a majority of Ukrainian troops are actually located. The fighting continues. They're on the outskirts. They're still engaged in combat. We do have footage coming out from this. But the issue is that there's questions as to what is the status of Saldar? What does this mean in the bigger picture at this point? The fighting may continue. It could be that the Wagner Group used up the majority of their resources pushing into Saldar and simply don't have the troops and equipment and ammunition and supplies to hold it. And they could be pushed back out. But it may be that they are able to stay and hold their ground, and we're looking at another long, arduous slugfest here in Saldar. Either way, as it stands right now, the northern flank of the defensive line has been breached, as we can see. This causes what appears to be a partial encirclement of the city of Bukmu and its defenses, as Saldar acted as the northern anchor point, or the northern hard point, for the Ukrainian defensive lines along their flank. But once again, the fighting does continue, and we do have some evidence of that coming out.
Так, мы по-прежнему в Солидаре. Пацики уже охеревшие в хлам, блядь. А пидоры не заканчиваются, сука!
And this is the Wagner Group, PMC Wagner Group, private military corporation. And if you notice something, they're not wearing Russian camouflage. That would be Ukrainian camouflage, with no identifying marks to identify them friend or foe. They're not wearing the white armband that is most particular to the Russian forces. The Wagner Group, founded in 2014 by a man named Yevgeny Prigozhin. Yevgeny Prigozhin is also known as Putin's chef. He used to run a catering company that catered to Putin, as well as high levels of the State Duma, and also to the high levels of the Russian armed forces. He's part of Putin's inner circle. He's an old guy. He's an oligarch. And the Wagner Group is a private military corporation. The Wagner Group comprises mostly of former military personnel. Now it comprises a large number of them, especially their lower ranks, comprise of prisoners, which were recruited out of Russian prisons, clear up to include murder. The Wagner Group has been operating across the globe. They operate inside of Syria, inside of Mali, Burkina Faso. They operate pretty much anywhere that there is some kind of instability in a country. They are Russia's plausible deniability, meaning that if something goes bad or they need to do something but it can't come back on the Russian Federation themselves, they use the Wagner Group. For instance, in 2018, specifically, the 7th of February of 2018, 300 members of the Wagner Group, as well as about 800 members of the pro-Assad regime forces, attacked a U.S. outpost, specifically housing Special Operations Forces in Cat 2 of 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, in the Conoco gas plant near Kasham, Syria, along in Deir ez-Zor province, along the Middle Euphrates River Valley. It was after calling a hotline, the forces between the United States coalition forces and Russian forces, they asked, "Are these your guys? You need to stop it." They said, "No, it's not us." And we proceeded to bomb them for 3.5 hours and annihilated them. Over 300, pretty much all 300 of the Wagner Group were killed or wounded, and the U.S. and the Russian government kind of shook their fists and said they killed them. They killed Russian citizens, but they couldn't really do a whole lot because they were mercenaries. They're private military contractors that weren't under the Russian military and were on their own orders. So that kind of gives you an idea as to what the Wagner Group is used for. That kind of shows you, what they're used for, what their task is. They are expendable. They are there for plausible deniability, and they are absolutely ruthless. If you're captured or you surrender, they will execute you. They basically hold a no step backwards doctrine, very Stalinistic, after same kind of ideology as the Battle of Stalingrad in 1941. Bakhmut does still hold, though, and despite all of the worries on their northern flank, the city of Bakhmut itself holds. The Battle of Bakhmut has entered into its 8th month, with proper military operations, according to our accounts, beginning on the city on the 4th of June of last year. We are seeing artillery batteries, obviously lots of heavy artillery usage by both sides. And the city has been absolutely destroyed. Indiscriminate bombardments from BM-21 Grad systems using 122mm Katyusha salvos has leveled the city, essentially. Ukrainians are continuing to conduct counter battery fire and also firing on the Russian defensive positions and trench lines outside of the city at this point. But it is a very slow, grueling process. The counter battery fire is to an extent working, considering most of these systems, the 155mm guns are outranging, without rocket assisted rounds, are outranging the Russian artillery by about 5 kilometers, but that still doesn't give a particularly large standoff when you're talking about some of these heavy artillery systems. They're still getting within range, and of course accuracy is always a factor as to how close you want to place, and the capability is also a factor in there. So, but we're seeing heavy artillery usage on both sides. We're also seeing Lancet drones being heavily used by the Russians. We've seen them used throughout the entirety of the war, but we actually get to see this is a ZSU-23-2, which appears to be mounted on an MTLB. The 23-2 is a twin 23 millimeter cannon. Fires at a very, very high rate of fire, and it's a very old anti-aircraft system. They're very effective, though, when you're talking about relatively slow-moving drones, and you're also seeing machine gun and automatic rifle fire here as well. Once again, copyright music, but that is the MTLB with the ZSU-23-2 on it. You see, like I said, automatic rifle fire there. And they're reportedly engaging a Lancet drone. Very difficult shot to hit, but those ZSUs really do help. But a very, very high rate of fire, to the point that you can actually, and this is a pretty amazing video because you can actually see some of the rounds as they are leaving the chamber, which is pretty nuts. But you can see the shell casings just flying out the bottom of it. Very, very high rate of fire. And those have been used against anti-personnel. You can level them. This is coming from Ukrainian troops, specifically Ukrainian snipers here inside of, reportedly in the city of Bukmu.
Один гранатометчик там у них. Здесь.
Есть? Есть, когда.
Второй.
Второй есть.
Минус два, братан. Минус два?
Да. Минус 2.
Братан.
Снимаемся. Минус 2. РПГ, готов.
Уходим.
So you see they had some sniper, so they obviously provided some sniper fire there, but you saw that they were booking it out of that building. Basically what happened is, not only did they become compromised when they started firing, that's not really the problem, especially if you're just dealing with infantry. The issue is that Russian doctrine dictates that if you're getting engaged from a building, basically that they level the building with artillery. They will call an artillery strike on that position. So after you engage, you have to move, and that goes for anti-tank teams as well. This is something that we're trained to do, is once you fire that jav, you got to move if you're in an urban setting, because likely they will either swarm your position, in which case you don't have enough security to actually hold it, or it will be leveled with artillery, or they'll bring in tank support and level it. So it doesn't take very long. Usually the reaction time is within 3 to 5 minutes. Jumping down here into the city of Donetsk itself, we're seeing more troops headed to the front lines. This is a bunch of Russian equipment that was located in the city of Donetsk itself, headed towards the front line. We are pretty sure that they are heading to Marinka, which is to the south, and we'll get to that at our next point. But this is just quite an extensive amount of troops and equipment. It appears to be probably a recently retrofitted group, a recently fielded group that may have either been rotated into country or has been brought back off the front line, rebuilt, and then put into the front again. But just quite an extensive amount of troops and equipment here. Once again, this is the city of Donetsk itself. You can see some BTR-82As. Of course, lots of logistical and support vehicles. That truck, that old truck that just passed by, this was built immediately after World War II. So this is actually designed, I could say it's a ZIL model. So I saw one of these earlier, and I was trying to, so the ones that they're fielding now, because they've been attrited so highly in their logistics, is that these are located in, that these were actually built immediately following World War II based off of the GMC design, and these served with the Soviets through the 60s. But that is headed down here to Marinka, more than likely. Marinka, we've seen quite an intense, we've seen a lot more footage coming out of Marinka over the last 48 hours. It would suggest that fighting is picking up here, and the troop movements also really indicate that as well. So their fighting has been pretty continuous in Marinka. Marinka is located here. It's on the south flank of the city of Donetsk itself, while Avdiivka here to the north is holding that northern flank against them. But the city of Donetsk is a very, very important, it's an administrative head, it's a political head, it is a military logistical hub, it's a repair hub, it's a mustering point for Russian troops, it's a major command and control center, communication center. So holding these locations, keeping that pressure applied to the Sea of Donetsk is extremely important for the Ukrainian troops, because it minimizes the flexibility of the Russian forces, and it also allows for Ukrainian artillery to provide precision fires, whether it be with the 155mm Excalibur rounds, as we've already seen, or with the HIMARS, which we've also seen striking at military ammunition depots, repair depots, command locations, communications locations inside the city of Donetsk itself, as well as high-level targets, HVTs, which are located within the city as they come and go. Marinka is one of those points that is holding that pressure. We've seen constant combat in Marinka. The city is absolutely just leveled and destroyed. We've seen thermobaric munitions used against Marinka as well, incendiary munitions, indiscriminate shelling, of course. But we are seeing we're seeing a much more intense, much more urbanized close quarters combat between infantry at this point, as well as that associated artillery fire. And so you could hear that, you could literally hear the artillery as it's shrieking overhead. Always terrifying.
Готов?
Готов!
Давай!
А я будь.
Виходь! Виходь!
Дуй, бля! Виходь! Давайте, да, зажати 2 магазини просяни.
Давай, ты туда, я сюда. Держи. Вот так вот.
зарядить. Лодочку остановить на лодку. Остановить на лодку. Ладно, остановлен. Выстрел! Выстрел! Расход один. Один заряд зарядить.
So that is Russian artillery reportedly firing at the city of Marinka. Fair says his kit sounds so heavy. Damn. Yeah. Kit can be extremely heavy. It is an extension. You get used to it to an extent. It becomes an extension of your body. But kit is very heavy. So I think the most I have ever carried kit-wise was a total of, keep in mind I'm 168 pounds at the time, was a total of about 215 to 235-ish pounds. That includes lots of machine gun ammunition, spare parts, spare barrels, my personal ammunition, my rifle, my flak. My pack was so heavy I had to have two people literally lift it on top of me and someone help me up. Very, very heavy. It can get that heavy. It really depends on what you're carrying, but at any given time, just your basic equipment alone without a pack can be upwards of over 65 extra pounds of equipment. Not even including your combat load, which is usually at least 6 magazines of ammunition or 180 rounds, and then also you're looking at your pack itself, which has your sleeping stuff, your food, your water, your other miscellaneous stuff, 550 cord, duct tape, electrical tape. You could be carrying a rocket. You could be carrying additional ammunition for machine guns. You could be carrying spare parts, spare barrels, what have you. So there's a large spectrum of things you could be carrying depending on what your mission set is. Usually you want to keep it mission specific, but regardless. And a patrol can last anywhere from a half hour to, it could last, I've had patrols, mounted patrols anyway, last up to 17 hours. So that is a huge amount of weight. That's very tiring, especially if you're doing a foot patrol. It is not exactly a very fun time. Usually you don't want to carry too much on a foot patrol like that, but it looks like they were actually doing a resupply, because if you notice, the guys in front of him are carrying a crate. That's likely additional ammunition. So he's probably carrying a bunch of extra stuff you wouldn't normally be, resupplying their positions there towards the front, or the more front line areas of Marinka. So here they trained at 40 kilograms, 200 pounds. Sounds enormous. It is enormous. It was one time, specifically, it was during what's called an aerial assault course, or an AC. We came in on Osprey. There's a company of us. We came in on Ospreys. We landed. It wasn't an actual mission. It was a training mission. It lasted about 48 hours. And we landed. We set up a support by fire. We moved from that position. So we hiked about a mile through the desert and then up a hill, set up a support by fire. I dropped off the 50 caliber ammunition that I was carrying, and then I actually displaced and went with the 240 crew and carried the 240, the A-bag, the tripod, and everything, and the ammunition for it. Dropped off there. And then from there, I went and we hiked another, I think it was another 14-ish miles to the next position and set up there and began engaging. And then we got a resupply of ammunition and set up into a defensive posture. And then we're engaging targets throughout the night and into the morning and what have you. So it wasn't for an actual mission. Usually my actual mission sets, I carry Specifically, for instance, when I went to the Baghdad Embassy complex, I carry my ammunition. So I had 180 rounds of ammunition, 6 total magazines. That went up to 9 total magazines once I got to the embassy. I carry my gas mask, which is in a canister that's strapped to my leg. I have my belt. I have my flak, which has everything on it with my tourniquets and everything. My M4 with RCO and my PEC 16 helmet, all that wonderful fun jazz, MVGs and what have you. And then I carry a day pack, which usually had a change of, or 2 pairs of socks, an extra pair of camis, extra cover, both the garrison cover and a boonie cover. I had 550 cord in it, spare map pens, a spare first aid kit that I had put together. Had my whoopee in it, had some hygiene gear, some basic hygiene gear, plenty of water, lots of water. And it also carried personal effects in it. So I had pictures of my family and friends and stuff. And I also had lots of cigarettes because I'm a smoker. So that's usually what I carry if I'm doing just a normal patrol. Plus, if I had extra ammunition or anything, I would carry that too. But generally speaking, I just carry what I need in a day pack that I can easily grab it, throw it, and I'm good. It has a general set of missions set stuff. But if I'm doing hikes or something, I'm doing a main pack. So, and then I also had the javelin on that mission too, which wasn't entirely fun, but because I never got to use it, and it was the way they had us carry it, it was exceptionally heavy, much heavier than it's supposed to be. Yeah. Apparently, Tim Up says here they trained at 40 kilograms, and apparently I trained at 90 kilograms. Yeah. I also don't have any cartilage left in my knees or my back, so it wasn't a good thing. Yeah, don't do stuff like that. It will destroy your body. Coming out of Dnipro, the number of casualties ended up rising again. The number of deaths due to the blast that destroyed an apartment complex in Dnipro on the 14th has risen to 40, including 3 children, after the Russian missile hit the high-rise residential building in Dnipro, with 76 wounded, including 15 children, and 30 people currently remain missing. Over 1,000 have been made homeless. The Swiss Embassy in Ukraine and the Embassy in Canada to Ukraine supported the effort of the World Health Organization in Ukraine for medicine. The UN Secretary General strongly condemned the attack in a statement. The humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, called for an effective investigation of suspected war crimes and appropriate prosecution of suspects. The Ukrainian Air Force claimed the weapon used in Dnipro was a Soviet-era Kh-22 Burya, or Storm, known by its NATO reporting name as AS-4 Kitchen. It could be used to target warships, was its intended purpose. Coming from the office of the President of Ukraine. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has released several sets of photos. So this woman was found. She was in the rubble for 10 hours before she was rescued. She was found alive. You see, this is an apartment kitchen, which is immediately cut from, this is where it had collapsed. And that is the apartment of the Ukrainian boxing coach Mikhailo Koronovsky, who was killed in the blast. This is from his daughter's birthday. This is the Secretary General of the United Nations, who stated that he condemned the deadly strike on the residential building in the city of Dnipro, in which over 40 people were killed and many more wounded and dozens missing. The attack against civilians and civilian infrastructure violates international humanitarian law. They must end immediately. First saying that she believes the entire family was killed. Of course, the United Nations, they're in the humanitarian coordinator there. Of course, hashtag not a target. The World Health Organization in Ukraine, providing medicine and aid to the immediate aftermath. The Ukrainian Parliament. One of those that was pulled from the rubble, who passed away, was 15-year-old Maria Lebed. Coming from Patron, who wanted to point out this wonderful pupper. This is Elton, who is a search and rescue dog. He's from Antares, Pavlograd, Ukraine, which is the search and rescue. But I've said a very good boys. Search and rescue dogs are on site. It's if you may have been alive to remember it, the aftermath photos very much remind me of the aftermath photos following 9/11. The search and rescue dogs, people being pulled from the rubble, often it turning into body recovery, that kind of thing. Just gives the same sense of feeling as the 9/11 attacks, which really are what defined my childhood and what was happening in the world at the time. Following that, gives definitely the same feeling. There's some people who claimed, and we actually had this happen on Saturday, that the strike happened because the missile was shot down by Ukrainian air defense systems. It was an intentional strike. That is coming from us, who are saying that it was an intentional strike. So, the recent video footage has been released from a dash cam from a car which was passing on the highway at the time of the strike that caught the missile as it was coming down back to Earth. The camera captured the incoming missile and its trajectory, which was set for the apartment complex. The missile is intact, and there is no sign of air defense engaging the missile over the city. On top of that, according to the video evidence and precedents through other similar strikes, at this point, we do not believe, from what we have seen, there is any interference with the missile's path, that the strike was intentional, and that there was no outside cause to cause it to, per se, miss its intended target. This was, in fact, very much a potential strike. And we do have the video here for you so you can see what we're talking about. This is a dash cam, and you can see. So usually when we have seen where air defense systems have engaged Russian missiles many times over the course of this channel, and you've seen what happens when that missile is shot down and is come down to Earth, with sometimes very devastating consequences when it gets to the ground. That is not what we see here. We see a single missile with its fins still intact. There's no fire. There's no debris. It's not shifted in any way. We can see as that missile is coming down, starting right here, on a perfect trajectory to strike the apartment building. Let me reiterate that again. That is a perfect trajectory with no signs of interception and striking the apartment complex. So by our observations and what we can see here, the strike was not a result of interception and poor timing. It was a deliberate Russian missile strike on the apartment complex in Dnipro. It was intentional. What was also intentional was the Russian artillery strikes, which continued to strike the city of Dnipro, or the city of Kherson. Russian occupiers shelled Kherson and the region 90 times over the past day. 3 people were killed, 14 citizens were injured. In particular, in Kherson, the local building of the Red Cross, a city hospital, a rehabilitation center for children with disabilities, a shipbuilding plant, critical infrastructure facilities, and residential buildings were damaged. Coming from Yaroslav Yanushevich, who is the head of the Kherson Regional Military Administration. And to be very much on point here, the Red Cross is the one organization which is, in fact, covered by the, it is in fact covered by name in the Geneva Conventions. By name. You see that coming here? Is some of the destruction from Kherson. And coming from Odessa, 6 more ships ended up leaving with grain. We can see that coming here. So from the Ministry of Infrastructure, reported that 6 ships carrying 153,000 metric tons of grain bound for Africa, Asian, and European nations left Odessa on January the 14th and 15th. So quite an extensive amount of stuff. So that's always good. You can always track it on the United Nations website if you're interested. But that is actually it for everything inside the country of Ukraine. But that's not everything that's not everything to deal with Ukraine. We have a ton more. And as we jump into the international news, the first thing we have is coming out of Belgorod. So it's a pretty loud night in Belgorod right now. The city was rocked by multiple explosions tonight. The governor of Belgorod region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, reported that the work of air defense systems.
Ошалеть. Что-то вон там светится, там бахнуло. Там дым идет вон.
This is reportedly what was shot down.
Ouais.
Actually, yeah, I understand there's a little bit of a delay with my stream, so I'm starting to get some questions that are kind of backfill from Ukraine, and said that Demise FPS ended up asking, KH-22 is an anti-ship missile, correct? Yes. So it was developed by the Soviet Union as a large long-range anti-ship missile. Jumping here over into Europe, we of course start off with the United Kingdom, which has stated that there is a lot of heavy support on the way. There was a lot announced over the last 48 hours as to what is going to Ukraine, and it is impressive. One squadron of Challenger 2 main battle tanks. That comes out to 14 main battle tanks with their full logistical suite, meaning the repair vehicles as well as their resupply vehicles, everything needed to run a squadron of the main battle tanks of the Challenger 2 is going to be sent. 3 batteries of AS-90 155mm self-propelled gun. One battery will be a complete 8-gun battery with all of the required logistical support needed. And also 2 under-strength batteries, which have yet to be announced as to exactly what they will include, but they will not be full batteries. The reasoning for this from the United Kingdom is so that way it does not deplete their own capability in their armed forces. Regardless, 3 batteries is still a lot. Several hundred armored and protected vehicles, most notably the FV432 Bulldog. Specifically, the Bulldog refers to the Mark III variant, which came around in the 2000s in response to Operation Iraqi Freedom. Several dozen mine clearing, breaching, and bridging vehicles and their equipment. Several dozen unmanned systems. This could include UAVs as well as UGVs. 100,000 rounds of artillery, which doubles the amount sent. So they've, up until this point in the war, they have sent 100,000 rounds of artillery. They will send an additional 100,000 rounds with just this package. This does not include, or they did not include specific calibers, whether that's 105s, whether that's 155. They just stated 100,000 rounds of artillery. Several hundred missiles, including the GMLRS rockets, which are their version of the HIMARS or the M270, as well as additional Starstreak air defense missiles and other missile systems, as well as spare parts and equipment, all for already serving Ukrainian equipment. In addition, an additional 20,000 Ukrainian recruits will undergo the NATO training course inside of the United Kingdom this year. An additional 20,000 on top of the 15,000 already promised. Don't believe me? You don't have to. Coming from the Defense Department of the United Kingdom themselves. The Challenger 2, everybody. One of the premier main battle tanks in the world and the primary main battle tank of the British Armed Forces.
Roger, enemy regular participants in the good line box. Redeployment, switching to Charlie Delta on Bravo.
Today,
Minister of Defense, Mr. Wallace himself. And this is the first section of the package. This is him addressing Parliament.
I can announce the most significant package of combat power to date to accelerate Ukrainian success. This includes a squadron of Challenger 2 tanks with armoured recovery and repair vehicles. We will donate AS-90 guns to Ukraine. This comprises a battery of 8 guns at high readiness and 2 further batteries at varying states of readiness. This donation will not impact our existing AS-90 commitment in Estonia. Hundreds more armoured and protected vehicles will also be sent, including Bulldog. A manoeuvre support package, including minefield breaching and bridging capabilities, worth £28 million, and dozens more uncrewed aerial systems, worth £20 million, to support Ukrainian artillery. Another 100,000 artillery rounds on top of 100,000 rounds already delivered. Hundreds more sophisticated missiles, including GMLRS rockets, Starstreak air defence, and medium-range air defence missiles. An equipment support package of spares to refurbish up to 100 Ukrainian tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. Mr. Speaker, it's worth reiterating why we are doing this. Because in 2023, the international community will not let Russia wait us out while inflicting terrible suffering on Ukrainian civilians. The international community recognises that equipping Ukraine to push Russia out of its territory is as important as equipping them to defend them what they already have. This week, dozens of nations will meet in Ramstein, Germany, to progress further donations and international coordination. The Kremlin will be in no doubt that we are resolved to stand by Ukraine in her fight. Doubling down on the success of our basic training for Ukrainian military in 2022 in the United Kingdom, we are also now increasing this number this year to a further 20,000. Canada, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Lithuania, New Zealand and the Netherlands have already joined this effort, and I'm pleased to say we are now joined by a group of Australian military to train in this country as well, leaving their summer to join our winter, brave souls. Our decision today is a calibrated response to Russia's growing aggression and indiscriminate bombing. The Kremlin must recognise that it is their behaviour that is solidifying the international resolve, and that despite the propaganda, Ukraine and her partners are focused on the defence of Ukraine. None of the international support is an attack on Russia or NATO-orchestrated aggression, let alone a proxy war. At its heart, it is about helping Ukraine defend itself, upholding international law and restoring that country's sovereignty. We believe that in 2023, increased supplies, improved training and strengthening diplomatic resolve will enable Ukraine to be successful against Russia's poorly led and now badly equipped armed forces.
President Zelensky, of course, responding. You want to talk about an aid package? Man. It would appear that Inky is... I am not giving the proper types of attention to my cat. I apologize. However, the internet was made for cats, so I hope you enjoy at least some of the look here. I got some questions here that came in. So most of these come from JL. First that said, oh, where's the hair tie? Seriously? Give me 1 second, everybody. Is this what you want? Is this Inky? Is this what you want? That was, in fact, what she wanted. Alrighty. Now, where was I? Okay, so, first question. How significant this support will be on the battlefield? It's not just the support, it's what it will foster. So, part of the issue is the fact that Germany, for whatever reason, just refuses to provide additional heavy gun support. This refused to get... I don't think you can escalate too much more than already providing one of the best premier self-propelled gun artillery systems, being the PHZ-2000 and the M270 Mars 2 HIMARS rocket systems. I don't think you can get much more escalatory than that. And who cares at this point? Who cares? But still, Germany is very reluctant. They've been reluctant. It's like pulling teeth for them to try and get them to take other vehicles, to get other, the Gepard, for instance, was a absolute nightmare to get. The Martyr infantry fighting vehicle has been a nightmare to get. And they are saying we're waiting on the United States to send tanks, because they're refusing not just to send tanks themselves, but refusing to allow Poland and other countries, Latvia, Finland, to send their Leopard tanks as well that they have in their stockpiles under the re-export agreements and licensing agreements that are between those countries. And you don't want to screw that up, because that could severely hurt future arms deals between NATO countries. Not good in NATO. What you end up seeing is Germany's, well, Fair just pointed out, Germany's defense minister also just resigned. She didn't want the job in the first place anyway. So it's not just their equipment, though this package is extremely effective. It's not just their equipment, but what this is going to foster later, and what we've already seen kind of growing as a coalition of countries. The challenge, and that really kind of ties in with the second question, which is how would you rate those tanks? The Challenger 2, as I already said, is one of the premier battle tanks in the world. So to give you an idea, the Challenger 2 is pretty much the Abrams, but British. AKA, it's the Abrams, but done kind of differently. Very similar design. If you notice, NATO tank design is very similar in their capabilities, what they require. It has a 4-man crew instead of a 3-man crew, so you're sacrificing the automatic turret for survivability, because it doesn't have an automated ammo rack storage in the back or in the bottom of the turret in a circle that will pop its top every time it's literally ammo racked by apparently any type of shell. It uses a composite armor. It's a homogeneous rolled steel plus a ceramic mix called Chocom armor, CHOCAM. And we can see that here. How did you get 3 hair ties? There was 1. Will you stop that? Anyway. And then we can actually bring out, this is the Book of Knowledge, as everyone knows, and I can immediately flip to the Challenger 2, as we can see here. For those that don't know, the Book of Knowledge is the book I received. This is the 0352 Anti-Tank Missileman Student Handout book, revised December of 2014. And this is what you get when you go through your 0352 course. And one of the main things you focus on is armor identification. You have to know, as an 0352, what type of tank, what type of armored vehicle it is, the type of variant, what its purpose is, what its capabilities are, and you have to know it by sight. And the Challenger 2 has a lot of different things. So, sorry, Chobam armor. It plus homogeneous rolled steel mix. Very similar to that of the U.S. M1 Abrams. It has a very large optics suite on the very top of the main gun within the gun mantle itself. It has obviously a gyroscopic gun sight that allows it to stay on target when moving within a certain range degree. It's operated by 2 countries, Oman and the United Kingdom, and it is the main battle tank of the United Kingdom's armed forces, specifically the UK's army. So it's so there was a Challenger 1, this is not an upgraded version. The Challenger 2 is a completely redesigned tank. They went through completely from the ground up. It just is labeled the Challenger 2. It has a 120 millimeter main gun with a max effective range of 3,000 meters. So there is a disadvantage here. It's a more accurate gun sight. It has very good capability, very good penetration. The ammunition types that they use on it instead of punching through the tank, they call spalding, which is where it actually breaks apart metals on the inside of the tank and just peppers the internal crew with shrapnel. Very cool type of rounds. It also has bolt-on armor sleeves and a whole suite of other things that go to it. But Russian tanks in general, the T-Series, have about 4,000 meters maximum effective range. So they actually have about a kilometer that they can accurately engage the Challenger before the Challenger can engage back. But the Challenger is more survivable, and it's also more accurate, and it's also more maneuverable because it's faster. It has a better engine in it. So pretty interesting. And it's relatively, and I say it's relatively light. It's 63 tons, which is pretty good. I believe if I'm going over here and go to the Abrams, give it a heavy size comparison. Yeah, so the Abrams weighs 57 tons, and a lot of Russian tanks weigh, if I can get to the Russian tanks, it's Chieftain, Centurion, Type 85-3. T90, for instance, weighs, Phil, tell me the weight, 45 tons. So you're seeing mostly heavier vehicles from NATO. So very good tank, very good capability. The Bulldogs are an older design. The Bulldog was designed, or specifically, is the FV432. It's an armored personnel carrier, replaced later by the Warrior and the M113s with a lot of countries. But the Bulldog variant is the Mark III variant of the FV432. It's a smaller armored personnel carrier. The Mark III design has armor, or has up armor on it. It usually comes with cage armor and a lot of systems that were developed in the 2000s during the insurgencies in Iraq. A lot of lessons learned 2004, 2005, and 2006 are where they received some of their more modern upgraded variants. So you're seeing that kind of coming through when they say primarily the Bulldog is going to be going out there. The AS-90 is a 155 millimeter self-propelled howitzer, very similar to the PHC-2000, and the M109 Paladin, of course. Obviously, going to be very effective. They have great horsepower they have a great drive train for their an engine for their size and capability. So it gives them very good maneuverability on the battlefield, pretty decent speed, and they are capable of course, still engaging at those 155 ranges, but they can keep up with armored forces, especially with NATO equipment. UAVs, always good, always nice. Mostly they're focused on providing unmanned systems in order to assist and provide gunfire support, meaning they're using them for more reconnaissance to effectively use the AS-90s and the rest of the stuff that they're getting. So that's great. Mine clearing, bridging equipment, breaching equipment, great for hitting hardened defensive lines. We're really seeing that kind of stuff that's really catering to what you're seeing here. This is looking at the trench warfare that has devolved in many parts of the Donbass and going, we need a way to break the stalemate. And this is what these vehicles were designed to do. Just because everyone said, let's not fight World War I again, doesn't mean everyone forgot how World War I was fought and didn't expect it to happen a second time. Definitely, there was a problem during World War II during development where everyone had the let's fight the last war all over again syndrome, and it didn't work, especially when you're looking at how horrendously France was underprepared for war, and some of the weird tank designs coming from the United Kingdom. Please go to Potential History if you would love meme tanks. It's an amazing channel. But we didn't forget. In fact, it's still very commonly trained on how to clear and how to engage trench lines. I did it so many times. So many support by fires for trenches in hardened defenses. It's just a thing you do. We design entire vehicles just to breach through lines, just to clear these minefields, because you don't expect them to play by the rules as much as you would like to, as much as it would make the inhumanity of war a little bit more humane, especially for civilians. You don't expect your enemy to play by the rules, and you always want to have that contingency of this could certainly turn into a trench war in the 21st century, and that's what we've seen here. And you do plan on it. It's just we don't plan as heavily on it as we did, say, during and immediately following World War One. But the potential is still there, and that's what those vehicles are going to do, is try and break that stalemate. And also a lot of UXO cleanup and bridging over the immense amount of major rivers in Ukraine, such as the Dnipro. So, a lot of good stuff. And of course, more ordnance is always good. More munitions, always good. More air defense, always fantastic. But the thing what we see, but what that's going to foster, hopefully, is Germany actually giving the thumbs up, and Switzerland also allowing export of their technology to other countries, of the things like the Leopard 2 main battle tank, also one of the best main battle tanks in the world, arguably. I'd say the Challenger 2 and the Leopard 2 are pretty equal in their capabilities. The Leopard 2 has a little bit better range on it for its main gun, for effective fires. I think that the Leopard 2 probably has a little bit more quantity to it, because of how many countries it was exported to. But the United Kingdom doesn't necessarily, it's a very strong military power, but it doesn't necessarily have the largest amount of equipment to push to the front, if that makes sense. They aren't the most readily capable. We don't have a large stockpile of other things laying around. For the United Kingdom uses the Challenger 2. That's it. There's no, you're not going to, it's not like Poland and Latvia and Estonia and Lithuania and Finland and Sweden and, Norway and everyone else and their mother who has imported the Leopard 2 at some point and the Leopard 1. It is Challenger 2, just the United Kingdom, very limited production cycle. JL says, let's say Ukraine would get 200 pieces of modern NATO tanks. Would that change a lot? 200 tanks would flatten the entire Russian resistance. I almost guarantee it. But they're not going to get 200 tanks. You're probably looking at about, because you're looking at from Poland to tank company, you're looking at the United Kingdom providing a tank company. So you're looking at an understrength tank battalion. So that's, what does that add to the effort? It gives you a capability to really, it gives you the capability of employing these really sophisticated, effective pieces of equipment into the battle space where you need it to make a difference, but there's not a lot of it to go around. And so you're not looking at 200 pieces of armor going to Ukraine. You're looking at understrength tank battalion going to Ukraine with limited logistical support, because tanks are a huge, huge logistical challenge for any country operating large fleets of them. And I do not believe that without support, I don't think Ukraine could physically operate as many armored vehicles as it does now. One thing I would love to see is the Abrams, just because I know that we have a lot of Abrams laying around. I was watching them drive off of the base in 29 Palms because the Marine Corps got rid of all of its tanks. So you have the entire Marine Corps' tank fleet that could possibly be sent to Ukraine if it really needed to, and it wouldn't impact Army doctrine at all. So that's a thing. But yeah, so pretty good capability, pretty amazing. Hopefully we will see more of it in the future. And if you want to learn more about the Challenger 2, they actually did put out an entire article. This is from the Ministry of Defense, who put out this entire article and talks about the Challenger 2 and what it can do. But very effective main battle tank. I say Israel should send the Merkava, personally, just because it's my favorite tank. If anyone is wondering what my favorite tank is, it is the Merkava. This is the Merkava 4. Jumping over here, this is in Moldova. I'm sorry, Moldova, but I'm not trying to pronounce that. That is horrendous. I have no idea what that accent is. But a grain storage elevator was caught fire here in Moldova. It's a port of that word in the south of Moldova, over a large grain storage elevator. Over 1,000 tons of seeds, according to the Ministry of Emergency Situations. Preliminarily, the fire broke out after collapse of the tank. No casualties have so far been reported. You can see that fire breaking out there. Most of the time, I'll at least attempt the name of a place. That is a little extreme for me. I apologize. Grain elevators are extremely dangerous, for those that don't know. They can very easily catch fire. In fact, you can't smoke in them because the dust from it will actually cause an explosion. Coming out of Palermo, which is here in Italy, a famous Italian mafia boss was arrested after a 30-year manhunt. Italian authorities arrested Italy's most wanted fugitive on Monday, taking mafia boss Matteo Messina Denaro into custody after a 30-year manhunt. Messina Denaro's arrest brings a close to the era of the Cosa Nostra Sicilian crime syndicate. The 60-year-old fugitive was caught in a health facility in Palermo, where he had gone for therapeutic treatment, said Special Operations Commander Pasquale Angelasanto. A report said he did not resist arrest and he was taken to an undisclosed location by police.
Posso?
There you go. The biggest Italian mob boss has officially been arrested. As we move down here and into the Middle East and coming over to Tel Aviv, where 80,000 people rallied in Tel Aviv against a judicial overhaul. Thousands of people took to the streets in Tel Aviv on Saturday. Opponents of the Netanyahu government gathered on the streets of the city. The demonstrators opposed the plans to the authorities to radically change the country's justice system. According to local law enforcers, the number in the rally reached 80,000. Organizers claim at least 100,000 people ended up taking to the streets. By the way, you're looking at quite a large demonstration. Coming down here into the United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week has kicked off. Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, or ADSW, is held in Abu Dhabi, UAE, from the 14th through the 19th of January. ADSW is a series of events regarding the sustainability agenda of the world. It is held by UAE's clean energy powerhouse Masdar. ADSW is the first international sustainability gathering of the year and is geared towards driving global discussion and debate around climate action in the run-up to COP28. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to AbuDhabiSustainabilityWeek.com, where they will talk about the events. Unfortunately, in Afghanistan there was a tragedy in Badghis, in which 5 people ended up freezing to death, with 4 of them being minors due to the frost. Shepherds in Javad, Khali Now, or Tagab Alem Valley, and Cadiz districts lost more than 4,000 sheep. Half of the losses occurred in Javand, where in some villages each family lost 20 to 25 head of cattle each. So exceptionally cold there in some of the more mountainous regions of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, in Kabul, a former member of the lower house of Afghan parliament was killed. According to Khalid Zadran, a spokesman for the Kabul Taliban police, Mursal Nabizada was shot dead in her home in the Salim Karvan quarter, the 12th security district. It is also known that her brother was wounded. According to unconfirmed reports, a bodyguard died. Masal Nabizada was elected to the 17th parliament of the province of Kabul, although she herself was born in Rodat district, Nangarhar, worked in an NGO as well as the head teacher of a private school. So that was Khalid Zadran's official Twitter there, who is the spokesman for the Kabul Taliban police. In Nepal, a plane crash has killed 69 and currently 3 people are missing. A plane with 68 passengers and 4 crew heading to Pokhara International Airport crashed into a gorge on Sunday, about 1 minute before the intended landing. Video footage showed the plane tilted toward the left in the sky. Eyewitnesses saw the plane spinning in the air before falling nose first to the left and crashed into the gorge. Local resident accounted having heard someone crying for help, but rescuers couldn't approach because of the flames and smoke. A phone recovered from the site reportedly contained a video recording from inside the cabin, recorded at the very last moments before the crash. 15 foreigners were among the 68 passengers, including 5 Indians, 4 Russians, 2 South Koreans, and 1 each from Ireland, Australia, Argentina, and France. It was reported that most of the passengers were returning home to Pokhara. The search team has retrieved the flight data and cockpit voice recorders from the crash site on Monday. Pokhara is the gateway to the Annapurna Circuit, a popular hiking trail in the Himalayas. The city's new international airport began operations only 2 weeks ago. Some aviation commentators reported that the crash might have been related to stalling from the left engine, meaning the engine lost its lift. So, Sky News does have that video on that as well. There's also that footage coming from inside the cabin. It seemed relatively okay, but it was a little bit of a tough call. So on the safe time, we have marked that 18 plus as well. And there's also a Reuters article if you would like to check that out. Hopefully we'll have some updates here in the near future. Coming out of Beijing, reportedly over nearly 60,000 COVID-19 deaths have occurred in the past month, according to the Chinese. On Saturday, the National Health Commission of China reported nearly 60,000 deaths in people who had COVID-19 between December the 8th and January 12th, after the World Health Organization urged for more transparency and timely reporting of data. The toll included 5,503 deaths due to respiratory failure caused by COVID-19 and 54,435 fatalities from other ailments combined with COVID-19 occurred in hospitals since December 8th. It's quite a significant number. This definitely coincides with the reports of more of crematoriums with large backed up lines. Meanwhile, there's a chemical plant explosion that happened in Penjin in Liaoning, China. The chemical plant explosion ended up killing 2 in the coastal city. The 12 others are currently remaining missing, while 4 were seriously injured and 30 are receiving minor injuries. Authorities said that the fire, which is said to have occurred during the facility's maintenance process, is currently under control. Regarding that plane crash, Eriva said, I read somewhere that the weather condition was good, visibility good. Yes, according to the video footage that was coming from inside of the aircraft, we could see that the actual visibility, weather conditions, because he actually does show the outside of the window, the visibility was very much good, from at least what we could see from the passenger aspect of the aircraft. So in that, it does not appear to be anything to do with weather or poor visibility, but rather a failure in the aircraft or a pilot error. Jumping down here into Africa, we're seeing coming out of Haran, Somalia, 15 people were killed by the Al-Qaeda affiliated group Al-Shabaab, who used suicide bombers. Two terrorist attacks in the province of Haran killed 15 people. About 50 more were injured. A suicide bomber from the Al-Qaeda affiliated group Al-Shabaab reportedly blew himself up near an administrative building in the center of Bulabird. According to security officials, the terrorist's initial target was the bridge, but something interfered with his plans. Another suicide bomber of the group blew himself up near the checkpoint of the Somali police in the city of Jalalalaksi. I am sorry for butchering that. See some of the devastation here. That's probably the administrative building there. Rather large explosions there. Fortunately, an Islamic State attack ended up killing 17 here in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the DRC, a terrorist attack in the province of North Kivu, where we've seen quite a significant amount of Islamic State presence, ended up killed 17 people and more than 10 were injured. The incident took place in Kasindi, bordering Uganda. Militants set off an IED in one of the churches of the city, and when the parishioners gathered there for Sunday service, the death toll could rise as some of the injured are in critical condition. Islamic State militants claimed responsibility for the attack on the 8th Sapak Church in North Kivu. According to them, dozens of Christians were killed and wounded. And that is the Islamic State statement claiming responsibility for the attack. "19 out of 20 countries with the highest burden for cervical cancer are currently in Africa." January is Cervical Cancer Awareness Month, and the African region is the highest burden of cervical cancer in the world. The World Health Organization recommends that girls ages 9 to 14 years to receive the HPV vaccine, and that women 30 to 49 years to undergo routine cervical cancer screening. Meanwhile, out of Mali, 21 people were killed and many more were injured during a patrol. 5 members of the armed forces of Mali and 1 civilian were killed in an attack by militants in the Kilikoro region. 3 more soldiers were injured. The incident occurred while patrolling the Kuala district. The armed forces of Mali managed to eliminate 15 militants, but their involvement in any specific group was not reported. So we do not know what group ended up attacking members there in Mali. Now for a little bit of an awkward one for me, considering how heavy of a smoker I am. Mexico has started a total ban on outdoor smoking. Mexico started to implement a total ban of smoking in all public places, which has been passed in 2021. There's also a ban on tobacco advertising, and the anti-tobacco law is reportedly the most stringent in the world. Vapes and e-cigarettes are also subject to tighter new restrictions. I am not expecting to go to Mexico anytime soon. And that is the hard-hitting news of the night, but we do have a couple of interesting stories to finish the night, as we always want to try and finish on a good or at least interesting note after a lot of relatively dark topics that we talk about here every single year and every single night that we go live. And what we see here is zoo birds have their own mini-me's here in the Cincinnati Zoo. Cincinnati Zoo released pictures of Harley, Sassafras, Zip, and Zulu with their crocheted mini-me's. The seasonal keeper made them these cute gifts. Isn't it just adorable? And coming out of here on the East Coast, a massive megalodon tooth was discovered by a 9-year-old fossil hunter. A 9-year-old fossil hunter who has collected more than 400 shark teeth along the Maryland coastline has found an enormous tooth belonging to a megalodon, the largest shark ever to swim in Earth's oceans. Molly Sampson fished out the 5-inch long in shallow water on the beach at Calvert Cliffs State Park in Maryland region of Chesapeake Bay. Sampson took the enormous tooth to Stephen Godfrey, who is a curator of paleontology at the Calvert Marine Museum in the Solomons, who confirmed that it belonged to a megalodon, or Otodus megalodon. Godfrey described the find as a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. I would have freaked out if I found that as a 5-year-old. And I have some cool fossil stuff, but that takes the cake. That's impressive. So you have all these other shark teeth, and then the megalodon. That's just one tooth too. Like, this is the largest, this is one of the largest predators to ever swim in the ocean. That is terrifying. Can you imagine if one of those things was alive today? I would never get in the water ever again. I wouldn't ever get in the water ever again. Nope. Baby wipe showers for me from now on. That would be terrifying. No, never happening. One of those things, it still existed. I would... Never would catch me in the water again, ever. But sharks are pretty cool. But that is all of the news around the globe, at least from our sources for the night. Quite a lot of stuff happening across the world. A lot of big developments. A lot of things that could have had some pretty big ramifications, especially in the future. And we'll just have to see how that goes, and we'll report on it as it comes out. But that is, of course, like I said, everything in the world tonight. A lot of relatively kind of dark topics. And I think, obviously, that's kind of what ends up making the news. And unfortunately, that's a lot of what is happening in the world right now. But don't worry, because there is some good things that can happen, and they can happen because of you. And that's because here at the New News, we're 100% a charity-driven thing. We are never doing super chats. We're never pushing merchandising. We're never doing any kind of monetization for personal gain. Everything that we do here is for fundraisers, is for charity. And so you guys allow us to be the news that gives back. And so please check out the video description below and check out all of the wonderful organizations down there. 70% or more of the donations that they all receive do go directly to their programs, with the emphasis on or more, with 30% or less going to things like salaries and administration's costs. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, please remember to give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, that's perfectly okay too. One of the biggest things you can do is help us grow this channel, grow our impact here, and allow us to continue doing this, and allow us to hopefully get larger and be able to do more good through it. So thank you very much for all the support you've given us and the wonderful organizations in the description. If you have even more organizations, please feel free to reach out to a staff member on our Discord, or also via one of our official emails on our website, and we will be more than happy to get that added as long as it passes our vetting process. And what we need is a link from you, as well as a short description of what that organization does, so that way we can get that vetting process started. In the meantime, we hope to see you back here at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central on Wednesday for another 48 hours of news and review. My name is Paul from the New News. Have a fantastic rest of your night. Have a fantastic Tuesday and Wednesday, and I will see you guys hopefully back here once again. Alrighty, guys. Have a good one. Bye now.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляно волновах, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляно волновах, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляно волновах, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your number 11, shove it up your wrinkle bomb. I will come and help you fit it in your skull.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляно волновах, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляно волновах, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляно волновах, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляно волновах, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Ідіть нахуй!